Okay, we're ready to get started. Welcome. It's great to see everybody. For anybody who was looking for Anna and wondering why she's not moderating this panel, as it says on the app, she did have a medical issue and so couldn't come to the conference. And so I am Meryl David's Landau. I'm a longtime health and science journalist. I have written thousands of articles probably on wellness at this point because I started with the women's magazines back when there were women's magazines, and they, of course, were the, I think, originators of wellness reporting. So one of the things that I think is most exciting about this category is how many publications have started to embrace wellness, even ones that were used to be much more scientific and news-oriented are now covering wellness in an expanded way. So if you're a freelance journalist, that's great opportunities in a lot more places. But also, as we all know, the wellness space is rife with misinformation. I'm going to say intentional misinformation in a lot of cases because it's so easy to sell wellness products out in the world, and so everybody who wants to sell something can put out their own message, which not necessarily based on fact. So this panel is called Covering Wellness Well, because covering it the right way and in a way that adheres to the facts and serves our audience is sometimes a tricky line. So I'm going to introduce my panelists, and then I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions, and then we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. There's going to be one mic, which is over there. So when we get to the Q&A, if you're on this side of the room, you'll have to walk over there. So my first panelist here is Rina Raphael. She's an independent journalist who specializes in health, tech, and women's issues for publications including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic. And importantly for this conversation, she's also the author of The Gospel of Wellness, Gyms, Gurus, Goop, and the False Promise of Self-Care. Love that subtitle. And she publishes a wellness industry newsletter, Well To Do, which covers trends and offers market analysis. And then next to her is Rachel Gutman-Wei, senior editor at The Atlantic, where she covers science and health. I don't think I need to say anything more. And on the end is Dr. Jen Caudle, board-certified family medicine physician, associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine at Rowan University in New Jersey. She's known as Dr. Jen to her more than 2 million followers, and she uses social media and TV appearances to share health information and, importantly, to debunk health misinformation, which I think could be a full-time job, and you probably wouldn't have time for your practice if you focused only on that. So I'm going to start by asking Rina. Your book is all about the wellness industry and how it can take advantage of consumers' anxieties and is often backed by dubious science. For journalists who haven't done such a deep dive, can you share some of the book's biggest takeaways and what surprised you most during your reporting process?
Yeah, I started as a health and lifestyle journalist at NBC News, and eventually I became the first wellness industry reporter for Fast Company magazine over 10 years ago. So I interviewed, I ran profiles and interviewed everyone from the Fitbits to the supplement companies to Gwyneth Paltrow. And what I saw over time, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, is because so much of the wellness industry is based on marketing. When I actually got to sort of interview these companies and kind of would check under the hood and ask for any scientific evidence for their claims, I saw that it was oftentimes a very small study, usually based on very small number of, let's say, rats, or published in a very low quality journal. The science wasn't really there, and yet when I looked around, everyone seemed to be obsessed with wellness, starting 15 years ago. So my book is not just about what's going on within the industry and how it sometimes preys on Americans' hopes and fears, but why the wellness industry became so big. Why is it so big in comparison to other countries? You don't see people in Italy flipping out over wellness the way they are in America. Why is the entire world sending all of their supplements to the United States? What's going on here? What primed us for this? And why is this specifically preying on women? So I think that's important because when you report on these things, you actually have to understand a little bit of the American psyche and what's going on in Americans' lives in order to communicate what you want. So, for example, for what I do, which is, I think, evidence-based journalism and trying to debunk certain ideas or trying to get people to think critically before they put something in their shopping cart, you have to understand what they're going through. You know, if you were to believe the polls, women are more stressed than men are. What's going on in their lives? Why are certain things appealing to them? And I think that otherwise you're not going to get through. I think I work sometimes a lot with the skeptic community. I consider myself part of the skeptic community. But they oftentimes are not successful in communicating what they want to audiences because their response is often, this is so dumb. I can't believe you fell for it. This is so silly. I can't believe that they fall for this wellness trend. That's not going to work with audiences. Debunking itself doesn't work. It's really kind of communicating your ways and idea that's not only empathetic and understanding, but also trying to explain in very conversational terms why it wouldn't work or why it doesn't make sense. That's obviously getting harder because articles are shorter these days, but that's one thing I learned, that you really kind of have to understand your audience at a very sort of personal level to do that. And it's now even harder, and I'll just share this last thing, which is that everyone wants to be a wellness journalist now. Wellness is the culture du jour. Open any magazine with a celebrity. They used to ask them, like, what are your favorite brands? Who are you wearing? Now the first question is, what's your morning ritual? What do you do for wellness? It's always the same answer. It's like, I wake up, I make sure to have a glass of water with lemon, then I meditate. But like, the whole culture is about wellness now, which means that there's a bunch of journalists now who, gosh, 5 years ago used to be covering Fashion Week, who are all now suddenly covering health. They don't know any science literacy. They don't know how to read a study. They don't know what to look for. And it's become really, really sort of problematic. It's become a very crowded market. I mention this only because sometimes you will deal with editors who also themselves don't know anything about health at all, and you're kind of fighting upstream. So anyway, that's a very long answer.
And I'm going to make your answer longer because you said one thing and I just want you to elaborate. You said that in America we were more primed, and that's why wellness is so such an important focus of people's lives. Is it because of the stress, or did you find that other
There's a number of factors, by the book. There's a number of factors. It has to also do with sort of our health system. It has to do with women feeling dismissed or feeling gaslit at the doctor's office. It has to do with even sort of going back, you know, to America's founding. We're a very optimistic nation, right? We're the people that, you know, built America. The Puritans built America. We went out west to secure our golden fortunes. We built Disneyland. We built Silicon Valley. We're real doers, and we're really, really optimistic. The flip side of optimism is gullibility. And that's what you are seeing over and over again when it comes to the marketplace. Americans love a quick fix, especially when they can buy. That's why supplements are so appealing to them. Gosh, I can just take this thing and everything will be better. It only had 2 months of testing versus, I don't know, 10 years of medical testing that it takes for a pharmaceutical. And you see this sort of kind of gullibility within journalism as well. I think a lot of people like to blame social media. I think there's a problem within media as well. I think of all the I tried it stories, like I tried this supplement and it worked for me, anecdotal evidence. They would never do the same thing for a pharmaceutical. It happens to be that wellness, you know, every publication is opening a wellness section, which is like a health section, but for some reason it doesn't have the same standards. A lot of more pseudoscience is allowed in there for some reason. It's treated like fashion, but it's a huge problem.
Thank you, that was great. Rachel, can you talk about a wellness-related story you worked on recently, or more than one, that you were proud of, and things like how it came together, any challenges, or you were the writer faced, and why you thought it was important to tell that particular story or stories?
Yeah, absolutely. One that came out earlier this month that I was pretty proud of was by a sociologist at Hunter College in New York. Her name's Andrea Becker. And I think the headline we ended up with was The Cost of Natural Womanhood. That story was arguing that this zeitgeisty obsession with the idea that one's hormones are sort of naturally exactly how they're supposed to be, and if anything is wrong with your body, it's because some external artificial substance has messed up your hormones. Usually it's birth control. So it was both revealing sort of how that trend came to be and also talking about the concerning potential consequences of it. Of course, number one being you might not get treatment for actual hormonal disorders, and also number two, just the broader sort of social and historical context in which women are often equated with nature or being closer to God, and if that's a value you hold, then you might not think that women should get treatment for various disorders. The way that story came together was Andrea and I had been emailing back and forth for a couple of years, I think. She had pitched me a few things. None of them were quite a fit, but we kept in touch because we were both very interested in reproductive health. We were speaking the same language, and she sent me, I think, 100 words that were basically, all the TikTok girlies are obsessed with their luteal phase. Also, Lorde did this interview in Rolling Stone where she said that she had gone off her birth control and suddenly ovulation was the best drug she had ever taken. And this is Lorde, so she knows about drugs, and that's exciting. And I had been kind of obsessed with that interview and trying to find a way in. So the fact that Andrea was also interested in it, we figured out what an angle should be. We went back and forth on structure. And honestly, the biggest challenge, I would say, in that story was just getting it done, because I think it was assigned in September of 2025, and my team spent from September to February just completely buried in HHS news. So it's been a struggle to get more evergreen stories through, especially for folks who are not staff writers. It's just been hard to prioritize, which is, I think, just a general problem in health coverage right now. Everybody is sort of responding to a 5-alarm fire and can't focus in on these still very important stories that are not necessarily as breaking news oriented. But it felt important to stick with it because it's an ongoing trend, both in terms of the literal sort of like, I love to be in my ovulation phase, I love to be in my follicular phase, but also the broader trends that contribute to that are ongoing.
Thank you. And Dr. Jen, can you bring us into the clinic? What is a wellness trend or product or line of thinking that you're seeing your patients interested in? And why are they interested in it? Do they tell you where they've heard of it or why they're thinking that this is something that you should be emphasizing with them?
Sure, and thanks for having me. Before I talk about that, and I appreciate both of your answers, so helpful, and I wanted to sort of piggyback on your answer, Rina, about, or like just discussion about this wellness obsession in some ways that we have here. I think a couple of things that I've noticed as a physician is, first of all, a lot of the wellness trends that I've discussed, whether it's soursop or sea moss or whatever the case, I've realized that a lot of this is cultural for many people. Maybe they're cultural customs that have been done in other parts of the world, whether it was India or the Caribbean or other places. And then it sort of gets turned into this sort of TikTok-y type of, just do this and this will make you do this, when really there are some cultural origins to the practice. The other thing I think that it's important to add in terms of our obsession with wellness and kind of what takes off is, I think systemic and institutionalized racism, over the years has played a role in people trying to find their own solutions to things, right? I'm not a fan as an evidence-based sort of board-certified physician, but my mother, who grew up on a farm in Tennessee and who had cows and pigs, they made their own clothes. Like that's the level we're talking. They had an outhouse. That's how she grew up. But she often has to remind me that in the time that she grew up, oftentimes evidence-based medical care was not an option for her. So that's also another thing playing a role in terms of perspective. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is the supplements. We don't regulate supplements well, if at all, if we don't regulate them in this country. I do believe that has also played a role in sort of that advent of supplements and nutraceuticals, et cetera, being, you can find a store on every block selling you something. So I want to just sort of add those perspectives into, as we talk about why we may be so health obsessed or how we got there. I think it's multifactorial, Rina, as you mentioned, but there's a lot of elements to that. As a family doctor, I often talk about how before COVID, the only things I used to get pushback were the flu shots. Everybody says, oh, the flu shot may be the sickest I've ever been in my entire life. Okay, that's what people say. So that's one thing. And then the Gardasil vaccine, which is the HPV vaccine. And many parents wouldn't want this for their children, their boys and girls, because they say, well, my kid's not having sex yet. That was what I got pushback on. That's it. After COVID, people won't take statins. They won't take metformin. They won't take ACE inhibitors. They won't take vaccines. And I say this from a perspective of, you asked, so what is it that I'm seeing in the office? I think COVID was definitely a huge shift in our climate. I've never, as a physician, dealt with so much misinformation in the office that I have to debunk, to the point where people are literally changing their lives, their regimens, they're making and taking their health into their own hands. I don't necessarily say this with negativity. I mean this really quite matter-of-factly. I've never seen so much of that as I have after COVID, and in some ways I can understand it. I know people, look, we were all upset. COVID was like probably one of the worst, if not the worst thing that we have experienced in our generation, right? So we can be very clear about that. And there were a lot of things that we didn't know. And I remember as a doctor who talked, during the beginning of COVID, I was sometimes doing 7 TV segments. I was sleeping on my couch because, remember, in the beginning of COVID, a lot of news networks went to 24-hour news, literally 24-hour news to cover the pandemic. And I was sleeping on my couch in eyelashes because I was doing so many segments. I got really good at that, by the way. I can sleep in lashes.
You can write a wellness blog on the health benefits of sleeping in eyelashes.
Perhaps. But one of the things with COVID that was really tough for, I believe, our nation, and was tough for physicians, was this was a new virus. And because of it, there were just things we didn't know. And so when people saw that one day, I literally remember I was on CNN 2 weeks before the shutdown. The guidance at the time was stop buying masks from Amazon, no masks. Literally, overnight, we went into buy masks. So people were confused. They're like, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, as doctors, I'll be honest with you, I've never lived through a time where this happened. Everything we do, everything I do in the office is evidence-based. It's based on data, and we're not usually in the situation where that data is changing daily. Because this was a new virus, I remember going on Fox News one day saying, we don't think if you get COVID, you can get it again. That was after talking with every infectious disease specialist I knew, reading everything I could, talking to everybody, and that was the guidance. And then, people are getting it again. And so there was a lot of mistrust, and I understand it. I mean, honestly, it was nerve-wracking for me as a physician because I'd never been in a situation where what you thought was correct, you find out that it is not so quickly. Anyway, so point being is I wanted to just give a little bit of perspective. After that time, the surge in misinformation and disinformation that I see in my office, it's remarkable. So let me tell you in the last couple of weeks what things people have asked me about. Dysautonomia is a big topic on social media circles. The idea that your sympathetic nervous system is not functioning properly can cause dizziness, lightheadedness, blood pressure issues, and other things. Dysautonomia is a very real thing, and some people have it. But the people who have it is like this compared to the people who do not. And what we see on social media is the cherry picking. People will pick a study, a symptom, a thing or that. Do you have bloating, diarrhea, constipation, and you feel tired and you've gained weight? Well, then you have, right? I was on the Tamron Hall show. We taped the episode on Friday and it aired yesterday. We were talking about cortisol. That's another topic in the news, right? Now everybody who gains weight, feels tired, feels exhausted, has a cortisol issue. By the way, adrenal insufficiency is so not common. And they have drinks that they're marketing to cortisol, to change your cortisol levels. And I tell people, if a drink changed your cortisol level that quickly, we'd be in a lot of trouble. The point being is this stuff, and I'll wrap it up, but cortisol, dysautonomia, there's even this about eating gluten is why your thyroid condition exists. That is not a fact. So many different things. So every day, and I agree with you, Rina, about the idea of meeting people where they are. It's not enough to say you're wrong. It's understanding. People, I do believe, want to do right. I feel like people want to do what's best for their health. I don't think they mean any harm. I just think that there's a lot of misguidance out there. And I could go on and on about what's out there and the people who are saying it. But yes, it's every day in my office. It's having numerous conversations about why this statin is not what the person on their podcast said, because it's not. So.
Great, thank you.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah.
This what you mentioned of sort of being inundated with like all these new trends, but also all these new fears. It's so true, and it's been going on for a while. And I think part of that is because here's the thing about the wellness industry, both from like a product perspective and just even like online social media creators, which is that it works a lot like the diet industry. Remember every year there'd be some new trendy diet and it didn't work, and so you put your faith in the next one and keep going on it. They always know that these things are going to be found out. At a certain point, they're going to find out that they don't have this adrenal fatigue. Or a doctor's going to debunk them of it. Or they try some supplement, doesn't work, and they're like, okay. So they have to keep coming up with new and new things because otherwise there's no content or there's no product. I once did a story for the Wall Street Journal on why CMOS got so big. And I spoke to a supplement company, and I swear to God, every trend was replicated in their history. There was bone broth, activated charcoal. Remember, wellness is like fashion, so every 6 months there's a new hit thing. And I was like, that's amazing that your team of scientists managed to investigate all these different ingredients. And like they were laughing, they're like, no, we just know whatever in the news, we just make a new supplement for that. It's like, and they're like, and you have to make all your money within a year because then the audience moves on to another new thing. And it probably drives physicians crazy because like you have to be an expert in all these random new things.
Probably easy to be an expert on all these random things is because there's no science behind them. You can just keep saying that, right?
I was actually going to say that. It's actually pretty easy, to be honest with you, because there is the data is lacking for most all of it. So it's actually easy.
Okay, so this is for Rina and for Rachel. If you could share a few of your best practices when it comes to reporting on and writing about wellness, and importantly, how do you find reputable sources, and how do you know that they're reputable sources?
Sure. One of my pet peeves is when people are writing a story about a certain study, a certain issue, and they don't go to experts within those fields. So, for example, I know a lot of scientists are very irritated when there's some sort of new study about some dangerous new skincare product or some sort of thing that's causing havoc on your body, and they'll go to a dermatologist instead of a toxicologist. Because a dermatologist doesn't necessarily have that experience with research. So oftentimes it's just making sure you're speaking to the right experts in that field. As for finding those experts, it's someone who is obviously, I'd look for someone who other experts refer to as being evidence-based. As for how I collect them, I'm very lucky I wrote the book, and I don't recommend writing a book about the wellness industry, which is really writing about over a dozen subsectors. But I try to, if I find an expert online who I think is really, really interesting, I try to develop a relationship with them prior to even my writing a story. And I've collected a pretty good group of scientists and experts, and I have several chat groups with many of them where we discuss ongoing stories. Their favorite thing to do is to spot some sort of CNN or CBS article and be like, this is crazy. They didn't even look at the study. Like there's a group of people that you just also learn a ton about how to be a better reporter, what to look for when you're assessing a study, when you're assessing relative risk versus absolute risk. So I try to make those kind of contacts beforehand, and then actually, and I think, Rachel, you do this as well, like keeping in touch with people prior to even deciding you're going to assign a story or write a story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also I can speak to this more from how I would assess either a pitch or a draft that comes in that is making claims or referring to various experts. I think number one is exactly what you said. Is the person you interviewed about this qualified to talk about it? Have they done studies about this? If they haven't, why do they know about it? And doing a fair bit of just background checking into that. And then also just ensuring that when experts are making claims that it is backed up by the literature, whether it's a study that they've done themselves or studies that somebody else has done, they shouldn't just be throwing facts and numbers out there without being able to back it up. And the reporter should generally know what the studies are that back them up. I mean, I have the luxury of having a really incredible group of fact checkers on my team, so they are taking care of a lot of that. I'm grateful for them every single day. And then also, I wanted to talk a little bit about interviewing the people who are actually selling this stuff, like you talked about interviewing the supplement company. And when I talk to my writers about this, I'll generally say, we never want to just take their word for this is what it does and this is how it does it. That's just never going to be reliable. But I do find it very interesting to speak to companies about why they are selling a certain product at a certain time. Why do they think now is the time to do it? Who is their target audience? Why do they think their target audience is interested in this at this time? Because it tells you a lot about sort of where the industry is headed and the more cultural aspects of wellness. Like I think all three of us have been talking about how wellness is mostly an intersection of health and culture, and you can't really talk about one without talking about the other.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to add my tips as a longtime journalist. I think it's so important when you're interviewing anyone to find out where their funding comes from, even if they're not supposedly representing the supplement company or whatever. Any doctor who's selling supplements should not be a source of any article that has even tangentially touching on deficiencies or whatnot. And I think if you look online too, there are, I think what Rina was talking about, there are blogs where experts really try to debunk or really look at in detail some of the science behind some of the claims. I'm thinking like in the OBGYN space, Jen Gunter is really good at really picking through all the flaws in the study that the influencers are citing for certain women's health things. And so if you find those people, they've really looked at the studies in depth that these claims are based on. So those people are really good. And then if you're writing about a study that's really small, I think as journalists, it's so important to say this supplement was studied in 6 women in 1 clinic and whatever else specific thing to really point out that almost all of the studies that are cited for any of these wellness products are tiny. So if you are going to be talking about them, I think it's really important to even overemphasize in a way that you might not for a more traditional kind of, other kind of medical story. Yes, we always say if it's a small study, but like usually for those kinds of stories, I will say it was a small study or a preliminary study. But when writing about wellness, I'll say it was a study of 12 women, in whatever, just to really overemphasize how small it is, because people are just seizing on, oh, it was a study, so therefore it must be factually correct. And then I want to just go back to you, Rachel, for a minute. So there's always a fine line between covering some of these trends and then and trying to debunk them, because you're giving them more air when you do that. So how do you feel about that, and what does The Atlantic try to do in that regard?
Yes, I was talking about this actually just in a meeting a couple of days ago before I got on the plane. We were discussing whether we should be running a story about Steak and Shake, the fast food company that is trying to make itself the Maha fast food chain. We did not come to a conclusion on that yet, TBD, but in general, we come from a position of privilege in that we are not a newspaper and don't have to cover every single thing that pops up in the news or every single trend that comes up on TikTok. So we're fairly selective about what we do cover in the wellness space. We tend not to run straightforward debunkings. We are very grateful to people who are doing that, but it just is not the sort of thing that tends to resonate most with our readers. So when we are deciding what trends to look into, usually I would say it falls into 2 broad buckets. Number 1 is this is simply unavoidable. You'd have to be living under a rock to not know that people are taking peptides or that people are drinking raw milk. Things that are so big that they're part of broader American culture at this point and they cannot be ignored. So at that point, we're not necessarily giving more oxygen because it's already breathing. And then the second bucket would be trends where even if they are less common, they're revealing something broader about the culture, about where the wellness industry is headed, et cetera. For example, last summer, one of my staff writers wrote a story about sun exposure and how like sunburns, really just red peeling sunburns, were becoming very trendy among Gen Z and Gen Alpha. No, it's horrifying. It sounds terrible. But she was combining that with other ideas in the wellness space about, for example, red light therapy, or Tucker Carlson thinks that you should expose your testicles to sunlight and that's good for your fertility. There's a lot there. And the sum of all of these together, it's not necessarily that we're now worried that our readers are gonna go sun themselves naked, but understanding how those trends arose and what connects them hopefully will then give readers the tools to say, all right, next time something like this comes up, why is this being promoted? How could it potentially be harmful? What am I not being told here?
That's unbelievable. And I wouldn't assume people are not going to go expose their testicles to the sun after reading that, because I think a lot of them will. Okay, Dr. Jen, how do you decide what to talk about on social media in terms of wellness, or which news segments to agree to? And also, how do you think the mainstream media is getting this wrong?
Got it. So I would also like to, before I answer that, piggyback on the stories that you guys tell and what you talk about. I'm not a journalist, so just put me in the non-journalist category. I revere all of you, and it's amazing what you do. I understand that you have different things that you write on, and you were talking about the focus of your publication, et cetera, and I do respect that. What I can say as a physician is, I appreciate every article out there helping to debunk these myths that are crazy. Just know that we as physicians, we appreciate it, because oftentimes in this space, silence is thought of as consent. If the only people talking about baking soda water or okra water, or what else we talk, I'm trying to think of what else I've talked about recently, raw milk, or that's a little bit bigger, but even the small things, if the only people talking about it are those who are promoting these sort of non-cures, well, then that's the only voice that we're going to get. And as physicians, we can only see one person at a time. I think it's in the office, that is. It's one of the reasons why a lot of us, I was doing TV long before I got on social media, but actually the reason why I always had social media, but it wasn't until the pandemic that my social media grew. And honestly, before COVID, I had never done any direct-to-camera videos. I'd only posted segments of my, whether quotes to articles or TV segments I'd done. I remember this was a few weeks before the shutdown. I was at the hairdresser, and I was at the shampoo bowl, your head's back like this, and I heard the lady next to me, she was talking to her, the woman who was shampooing her hair. She said, black people can't get COVID. They can't get the coronavirus. And I think I almost got whiplash, because I was like, what'd you say? And it was unbelievable. So I go home and I'm like, because we were talking about coronavirus, and that's when things were really starting to be. I Googled coronavirus, black people, and then there was all this stuff about black people not getting coronavirus. It's the first time I ever made a direct-to-camera video, because I was so incensed about it, right? Because if black people think they can't get coronavirus, which we weren't even calling it COVID then, well, then there's going to be probably a lot of black people who die from it because they're not taking precautions, right? That's a health issue. That is directly impacting lives. That video went viral in the millions, which is why I started making content. My point, though, is that it is important for us to be combating the wrong information that is out there, because if it's not, then some people actually assume that silence is consent. And so I say this to say, as an encourager, please help us. As much as you can. This is a very selfish standpoint, right? I'm a fan. And on my Instagram, a lot of times, I'll get asked by reporters to do quotes. If I can't do them, I'll pass them on to my colleagues or friends. A lot of the people I follow, I just say this as a note if you're ever looking for experts. A lot of the physicians I follow on Instagram are also very media savvy. They've written books in the field, Jen Gunters and types like that. Most of us actually have started doing this work because if there's no opposition, people take it as consent in many ways. I would also say, and thank you for making the point about being pedantic about saying it was a small study, and this goes to actually answering your question about what does the media get right, and et cetera. I would argue, feel free to take it a step further. Many people don't know how to interpret what a small study means. They're like, it's a study. So a study, great. I'm just telling, listen, I'm just telling you, my patients don't know that a small study or a study done in rats, never done in humans, they don't understand that that's not legitimate. And so I applaud you all for taking that, and thank you for going to the point of trying to be very specific, but feel free to even go further and say, according to experts, this means da-da-da-da-da, or according to experts, whatever it takes. I saw on my local news, and I appreciated this. They mentioned a study. I remember one of the reasons why I got into this is because as a med student, I would see in my local TV, they'd be like, a new study shows that eating 3 oranges a day can cure your breast cancer, back at 6. And I'm like, oh, come on, right? But now, and I just recently heard this in one of the teases for a local news channel, they said, or the anchor said something like, but this was an observational study and doctors say it needs more evaluation. And I was like, oh, yes. So my point being is, don't assume your audience really even understands what a small study or a study not done in humans means. Because remember, those people who are touting this information, who have podcasts that last for 2 hours, who have doctor before their name, but they're not actually medical doctor, what they do is they cherry pick. They cherry pick one thing from a study. They call it a study. They're not being transparent about that. That's, people hear study all the time. They assume that means, oh, it's stamped. Sometimes we have to explain to them why that's not the case. So feel free.
And even if they
It's an
have
invitation.
MD after their name, there are plenty of people out there who you can't trust anymore.
You're right about
Unfortunately. Rina, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the media is getting wrong in terms of the wellness space? And also if there are any particular publications, aside from The Atlantic, of course, that you think is doing a good job of covering wellness.
I mean, part of my book is partially a mea culpa of the things I saw and did when I was at NBC News and other newsrooms. One of them being, as Jen just sort of mentioned, is just every study that comes through. The majority of, I think, major newsrooms, they don't even read it. They just see the press release or they just grab a wire story, and because they perform well. And that leads to sort of like oftentimes nutrition schizophrenia for the audience. They're like, wait, last Tuesday you said eggs are bad for you. Now today they're good for you. You absolutely kind of really confuse the American audience, and then they start to trust the media less. So that's one issue. I was actually joking last night with Rachel that like one of my favorite headlines from the last year was like, wasabi boosts memory. And it was like on CBS and CNN, all these places. First of all, I don't know what anyone would do with that information. So no one's going to eat like tons of wasabi. But then I actually looked into it. I sent it to some of my scientist friends, and it was a study done on 12 rats, and it was funded by the largest manufacturer of wasabi, literally big wasabi. But it was everywhere. And I know because I've been in those newsrooms and everyone's trying to make their quota of clicks that they need to make, and they know it's going to perform well, and people are going to share it and make jokes about it. So that's one issue. And then the issue is, as Rachel was mentioning about deciding what to cover, I'm lucky that I'm very thoughtful about what I want to cover. I get a lot of incoming requests of, can you debunk this? Or this is trending, can you debunk that? And I don't think that that necessarily is a good protocol. And I'll tell you why. And I see this as a #1 issue with all of our top publications who have now unleashed their own wellness sections, which again, do not have the same standards as their health section. Right? There's less standards because it's more lifestyle. It's not taken as seriously. It's cutesy. People generally only read the headline. 70% of readers only read the headline, maybe the deck. So you have all of these headlines that are like, do you really need sunscreen? And then the answer is in the last graph, and it's yes. But you're assuming the reader's gonna get all the way through. All the answers are always at the very end, like always, like this either needs more study or this is something that is totally ridiculous.
Yes, the question headline seems to be very popular.
So it's that too, and just also giving air to these things when you know that the average person is only gonna read the headline, I think does more damage. And so I generally think that a lot of our top publications are failing at this. Granted, that being said, the average person is getting their information from social media, which is why we need people on social media, creators who are also helping us with this. That's obviously very, very hard. I did a piece for the New York Times last year about content creators who are fighting against misinformation. It takes so much money, so much time. There's not enough money for them. They're not getting public funds for this. The only way for them to make money is usually to partner with a brand, but then that compromises them. They need a lot of help. And so I think we're actually in like a very sort of a really hard moment right now. It's very, very difficult for content creators and for journalists. Any journalist who's working at a normal publication that is very different than a long-form, respectable magazine is being forced to churn out this stuff.
Great, that was great information, all of you. Rachel, one question for you, for all the freelancers here who are interested in the Atlantic. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you look for in a wellness-related pitch, and specifically what makes something distinctly Atlantic? And is there an area of wellness that you're particularly interested in getting pitches for?
I'll start with what makes a story Atlantic-y in general, I think, and then go more narrow. We are famously the magazine of the American idea, so we love pitches that center around ideas or advance some kind of argument, what have you. A lot of our favorite and best performing stories will identify some kind of trend or a phenomenon that's been sort of bubbling under the surface for a while, or put a name to some common experience that hasn't been really defined in a satisfying way, or advance some kind of argument, but do so in a way that doesn't kind of fall into the flat op-ed voice that can be very common. And then in terms of wellness articles in particular, I mean, like I said, we are fairly selective in what we cover, and we don't cover every single, try this supplement, try that supplement. We really do focus on things that are having the largest impact or reveal something larger about where the industry as a whole is headed. We are not necessarily like, there's not a subject or a sort of subsector of the industry that I can point you to, because it just depends on whether or not it's interesting. We like counterintuitive stories. We like stories that take something that many Americans have experienced and force you to think about it or look at it in a new way, or think about how someone else might be experiencing it that's different from how you do.
So, I know you gave us the one example before, but can you think of one or two others of stories that you've done more recently that fit that category?
In terms of freelancers or just anything?
Yeah, just the kinds of wellness stories that you've covered recently. Just give
Sure.
us a couple of examples.
Oh, one other thing actually that I should have mentioned is we have been very interested in sort of who the main characters are in the wellness space right now. So for example, one of our freelancers, Shayla Love, had an article that came out this past weekend about Brian Hubbard, who is the sort of Republican psychedelics whisperer, and basically he is the reason that the executive order came out that was very favorable toward Ibogaine. So understanding who the power players are, especially as the wellness industry and the government become ever more intertwined. Like, one of the major themes that we've been thinking about is, who is RFK listening to right now? Who is everybody else in the administration listening to? Where are they getting their information? Those kinds of stories, very interesting.
Great, thank you. And since you mentioned psychedelics, as someone who writes a lot about psychedelic medicine, I just want to caution everybody to be careful about how psychedelics is starting to infiltrate the wellness space. There is a lot of very intriguing research about psychedelics, and it may get approved as a drug probably faster than another administration might approve it, but just be careful and how you cover this. We're going to open up for questions. The mic is over there. So if people have questions, if you're directing it to a specific person, say that at the beginning. Be sure you introduce yourself. Thanks.
Hi. So I'm Rina Goebel. I'm both independent journalist and nutrition expert. So I hear all these things from different sides. And The Atlantic's such a wonderful publication. I have an article there from 10 years ago that is still one of the articles that I'm most known for, on special things that an elementary school is doing. One of the things that I've personally encountered, and I would love everyone's opinions on this, is how do you show respect to opinions that are different than yours, so that they feel they're heard? For instance, once in a while, like I'll answer something on Instagram or in general where someone's saying that all carbs are bad and they should have a diet of only meat. And I had a conversation with this person, and by the end of it, she felt respected, and she decided that maybe she should eat whole grains and maybe she should be eating more vegetables. But I'm curious on how we can foster those conversations both in our writing and I guess in general.
Thanks. I'm going to give that to Dr. Jen, since you deal with one-on-one with people in that situation.
So congratulations. It sounds like you were able to say things in a way that convinced this other person to incorporate other things in their diet, which is awesome. In the office, a few things that I have to remember, despite my frustration with some of the misinformation that's out there. And remember, my frustration really comes from it keeps my patients unhealthy, right? It's taking them off statins, increasing their risk for heart attacks and strokes, et cetera. So, but I have to remember that people overall are well-meaning. And I have to remember that the best way that I can approach my patient is with sort of love and respect and openness. The conversation usually is a basic conversation. Tell me what it is that you read, or tell me what it is you heard. Tell me where you heard that. Tell me why you decided to stop your blah, blah, blah. Tell me what your concern is. I think one of the big things is people stopping medications. They're afraid. The common things is I was afraid to become addicted. I heard it damages your kidneys. I heard it damages that this is what happens. I heard it, blah, blah, blah. So understanding where the sort of the breaking point for them was, the decision point to either not do something that's recommended or to stop, is crucial, I think, to helping them, hopefully make a healthy decision. And then from then on, after listening, I think it's always better to, and I can do this because I'm not a writer, right? But it's always better to listen than to talk. And then I can say, I understand that, I get that. Let me tell you some other sides to it. And sometimes it's negotiation. I just saw a patient not long ago. He's a diabetic. He's got high cholesterol. He does not want to take diabetes medications, and he's only agreed to take his cholesterol medications every other day. And that was really the compromise point we came to. I mean, sometimes you can't convince people. That's life, right? But there is what we call in medicine shared decision making, and approaching things from that point, at least from my perspective. Again, I'm not a journalist. That is what's been helpful for me, because people ultimately have agency over their health. My job is to make sure that they understand the truth so that they can make an educated decision. The problem is when they have myths and lies as their reality. You can't make a good decision or an educated one when what you believe is actually not true. Let me at least help you understand what is true and what is not, and then you can make your decision. At least I know you've actually got facts for which to do that.
One of the things I heard yesterday, too, when I was at the Children's Hospital field trip, one of the doctors who works with transgendered medicine patients was saying that she always looks for where the question is coming from. So when the person says, I'm worried about whatever, like, oh, you and I are both really concerned about children. Like, to just start with the top level, what we both agree on, where the question or the concern is coming from, and then address it from that. But I thought that was a really great tip, even when interviewing people, like, just start with the thing you're agreeing with, even if it has to be really, high level part of that conversation or that topic.
I'm Betsy Taylor. I'm with the Catholic Health Association. I was wondering about the economics of wellness when it comes to the consumer. I have a neighbor, she's a nurse practitioner, and she gets really concerned about sort of the economic gatekeeping. She says, wellness at a basic level should be for everyone. And then I also was curious about people with discretionary income and how it seems like they're marketed to more so with a lot of these products. And, they have the ability to try these therapies. It seems like just the choices that people are making can be really based on, the money they have.
I mean, I'm just going to say I think the people who can't afford some of these $1 million supplements are probably better off than the people who can, because then they're not tempted to try all the shit that's out there. But if anybody else wants to jump in.
Can I just say one quick thing? I don't have a big answer. What I'll say, what I've noticed in my office, it affects everyone, and it disproportionately, at least from my patients, affects those without the money. They're spending $60, $80, $90 a month for one supplement. And it's one of the reasons why it makes my blood boil, because, you know, I'm sure there are people who can't afford it that do engage, but the number of people I see who can't afford it, who are engaging, it's actually the thing that makes me feel even worse. So I see another side too. I just wanted to just throw that out there.
I think this is why so much of my reporting takes aim at the marketing and messaging, because that is so much part and parcel of the modern wellness industry. And I get a lot of people who ask me, why are you always bashing the wellness industry and self-care is supposed to be good? The wellness industry is very different from actual wellness. And you have to actually ask people, when you say the word wellness, what are you talking about? Because it could as easily mean fitness and nutrition as it does beauty skincare masks and activated charcoal toilet paper, which exists. So what are you actually talking about? When something starts to mean everything, it starts to mean nothing, and that's what's happened with wellness. But yes, it has come to be sort of seen as an aspirational good, and it hurts people in a number of ways. In my book, I talk about the fact that the messaging around organic food has been detrimental. I spoke to numerous people across the country who said that they had been terrified by the EWG, the Dirty Dozen, about, you know, that conventional fruits and vegetables that supposedly have pesticide residue and therefore is somehow going to kill them one day, that they avoided, but they couldn't afford organic, which is sometimes 2 to 3 times more expensive, that they avoided the produce aisle altogether. So it definitely is completely problematic. But again, it depends what sector you're talking in, and every single sector is different. So when you're talking about food, there's a lot of values that we give food, especially with women. So like every sector has to be sort of kind of dealt with separately. But I will say that this industry is primarily preying on 3 groups, one being mothers of young children, who they terrify over them about being good parents and what does a good parent mean. The second being the elderly, who are very sort of concerned about their health, and then people who are dealing with chronic ailments. And they are the most at risk of exactly what you said. It's a huge problem.
And the sad thing is, when you think about wellness, the percentage of Americans who follow recommendations for exercise, for nutrition, for sleep, the things that we know actually lead to wellness, is so small. You know, if people would focus on that, and as journalists, it's a challenge because it's boring to write about that. It's much more exciting to write about activated charcoal toilet paper, but which I never heard of before. But I think we really need to emphasize, in any story when you're writing about any of these modern trends, we have to emphasize that the things people aren't doing that actually scientifically we know lead to wellness are the things that they should really be putting their attention on.
Hey guys. First of all, you're all awesome, especially Cheryl when she called supplements shit. And then she talked about, sorry, Meryl. And then when you just talked about how people don't really just want to hear about sleep and hydrate and living your life, because that's something we face a lot. I'm Eric Strauss. I run health and medical at ABC News. I'm really here to say hi to Dr. Jen, who comes on our shows a lot. I'm sort of the gatekeeper at ABC News about the wellness stories that we do. Producers come to us or we pitch stories to them. And I just wanted to encourage people to, maybe not the Atlantic, because I understand the long form journalism, but I think we do need to every chance bust down myths. I used to not think that, I thought it just gives oxygen to it, but there's so much out there, and even people who kind of get science, they don't have the time or expertise to study and see what the problem is. So like we don't have the public to help us, and social media, it's so easy just to say like, take ivermectin to cure your cancer. It's much harder to say what the limitations are. So I just want to share that. And also I'm just wondering through AHJC if there's a resource where we could kind of pull resources on analyzing studies, kind of like a rapid review. Like I wish I had Tara on my desktop to always tell me why the studies are shitty, but sometimes she ignores my calls, so I don't. But I mean, at ABC News, we do have to respond to other media also, or else what's out there. And I'm finding it harder not to name anyone, but we tell our evening news, like, you can't do that study, it's in 3 mice. And then they say they get it, but then they see it maybe in like the Washington Post or New York Times or CNN, not to name names, that, you know, they put the caveats, everybody puts the caveats, and we all have tough editors, but it's just hard to like chase it. And I just wish we could kind of get together in real time. Like I always see like 3 days later, somebody wrote like a kick-ass takedown on X or whatever, but it's like too late for the news cycle. I just said a lot of stuff, but I just want to say thank you so much.
And I don't think any of us have the answer to any of those things that you raised. But I will say one possibility is to maybe group together. Like if there's a lot of crap out there about women's health, instead of chasing each individual study and each individual cure and focusing on that, maybe, you know, we could think about doing broader pieces that really focus on, here are all the trends that people are talking about and that they're not really going to help women's health, and instead do these basic things that we know about. I just always come back to keep putting that in every article about any of this stuff, why people don't follow the actual things that we know lead to wellness. It is important to just keep reminding people.
Oh, I just want to say one thing. I would also recommend getting a group of scientists you know and love and just doing, and not just tapping them when you're like, hey, what do you think of this? But just getting a group going. Like I have several of them that I've sort of cultivated over the years. I also go to a lot of science conferences, and they've been fantastic about that, because no one's more angry when they see something in the news that drives them, or some study that came out that's getting a lot of like fan fiction. So I will tell you that I know a lot of scientists that write those takedowns on their Substacks, but like no editor reached out to them. They don't. So like cultivating those groups, and you'd also learn a ton from them, just from like what they think is interesting or exciting or stupid.
Hi, I'm Joanne Kennan, and after 10 exhausting years running the healthcare Politico, I'm now the journalist in residence at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and I recently co-wrote a book on the intersection between the decline of media, the rise of disinformation, and how it's affecting our health, both as individuals, as institutionally. So anyone who wants to chime in, fine, but it's really mostly a question for Jen, because I spent a lot of time in the disinformation fighting space. And there's a lot of faith Americans still trust their doctors. And that's true up to a point, but there's also studies showing that Americans like their doctors but don't follow their advice. And there's a lot of Americans who, despite the advances in coverage, still can't afford to access care, or don't know how to access care, or are in care deserts, et cetera, like millions of Americans. So you've sort of talked about how you're successful at debunking, but I also want to know, like, what are some of the obstacles you and your colleagues are seeing? You often only have 15 minutes to take care of both their health needs and all the stuff they saw on TikTok. And when you those who don't take your advice, do you lose them? Are they still part of your panel? I mean, you're obviously a really talented communicator, and what are you seeing in the real world of fighting this battle?
Well, thank you for being on the myth-busting sort of platform. Appreciate you. I'm going to try to be succinct in addressing many of the good things you asked. First of all, I'm not always successful. You mentioned that I'm successful at convincing or whatever. No, I'm not always. Maybe half the time. I don't know. Maybe most of the time I'm not. I do feel that there is more distrust of physicians than there ever has been. People do not trust me just because I'm a doctor. I'm not. Well, I guess I hope they would. I mean, I trust my mechanic. I take my car there. You know, I mean, you hope that you can trust the people that you're going to for things, right? That's your dentist, anybody, people who working on your house. So no, I'm not always. I don't always fix it. What I will say is the health system has changed in such a way, and the distrust is so huge. I've actually had to start addressing the things people don't trust about what I do. For example. People will say, doctors I have a whole list. They say, doctors don't recommend supplements because they they'll lose a patient, they won't make any money on you. They want to keep you sick because if they make you well, they won't make any money. I have a video on that. I never had to do a video on that, but when you see these buzzwords, when I see these buzzwords, it tells me a lot of people think this way. Patients say they only spend 15 minutes with you, they don't care about you. I made a video on them. Hey, I'm an employed doctor. I'm not in private practice. I had to make a video to explain to people that I'm told by my health system how long I get to see patients for. Do you know how many people had no idea? Like in the comments, they're like, oh my God, I didn't know. They think that I'm just out here just cutting them off and throwing them out the door, or only choosing to see people for 15 minutes. To answer your question, I have not figured it out. I certainly hope I'm making progress, but the level at which I literally had to sort of almost open my heart and my space saying, hey, the copay you pay at the front door, I don't get that, just so you know. No, literally, because people will also say, well, they double book you and do all this so they can make more money. I have a video on the fact that I'm a salaried doctor. I make a salary, and that's it, no matter how many people I see or not. And I even had to make a video explaining that my charts get audited, meaning I have metrics. People don't know this. I have metrics that if I don't see a certain number of patients, I lose this, lose that, they audit my charts. But it's this level of transparency I've had to get to because of the distrust and the mistrust. I don't know if it's working, but this has been my personal response because in some ways I don't know what to do. They come into the office and many people feel like I literally am their enemy and they're kind of guarded. And I want to say, and sometimes I have to say, I am actually on your side. I don't get any more money because I ordered this test. I do not get kickbacks from vaccines. I don't take your copay. That is not mine. I don't get to set the appointment time. I'm so sorry. And it's gotten me to this almost base level of like literally being like, help me, So I don't know if this is helpful when you ask those questions. I imagine you wanted to get something out of this that you could use, but I hope you understand maybe, if nothing else, how we as doctors feel. It's exasperating. And I think it hurts my feelings, to be honest with you. My feelings get hurt pretty easily, but I'm just saying. But it's actually hurtful. A lot of people actually just think we're actually out to get them.
Yeah,
that is a sentiment I've never dealt with before.
And I just want to say that part of that came from COVID. That was not an accident. All of the people selling ivermectin and all of the other things you could take were also pushing very don't trust your doctor kinds of messages. So I think we need to be careful when we say people don't trust their doctor so much. Some of that is intentionally pushed by the people who are trying to sell all the other stuff that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tess. I'm with Connecticut Public Radio, an NPR affiliate. I'm wondering if you all have seen or experienced kind of the infiltration of the wellness industry into healthcare. And I ask this because I've come across some nurses and PAs, to my absolute horror, who are anti-vax.
Well, for sure. I mean, number one, just even look at our most esteemed institutions. The Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic have integrative wings that are pushing things like Reiki healing for a number of ailments. It's everywhere now. I mean, wellness has really infiltrated sort of everything. It's very, very difficult. So 100%, but I know in my work, it becomes very hard when I will sometimes get pushback from an editor who traditional Chinese medicine or whatever it is, something that doesn't necessarily have the scientific evidence behind it, and they'll say, well, I see it on the Cleveland Clinic website. So what's the problem? How do I respond to that when it's, look at our administration. So, it's at all levels now. That is the wellness industry to some degree, this idea of selling supplements, selling things that have very little, if any, scientific evidence behind them, or they have studies that have just as many things saying that it works as well as a placebo. So I guess my only point is that if it's reached the top levels, it's very, very difficult at this point, even within our own industry.
Hi, I'm a freelance journalist. Thank you. This has been really interesting. I'm curious about, I feel like there are a lot of ways in which a specific piece of misinformation will get packaged for a specific community that will encounter it in a silo kind of, and you might find messaging that helps counter it for like Gen Z, but then my dad screenshots it and sends it to me and it was on Facebook a year later, and now it appeals to 65-year-old men. So I was wondering, at what point is there like an attempt to debunk for each audience versus an attempt to create something that is like going to work for everybody? And then when do you say like, we've run too many pieces about this or we're talking about this too much?
I can try to answer that one. I think even though, as I mentioned, we're not debunking every single thing that comes up, in each story, we are really trying to give readers the tools to understand how to do it for themselves. In the least do your own research way possible, just to apply a little bit more critical thinking about, I mean, all the things we've been talking about, what constitutes a study, what constitutes an expert, these sorts of things. So I think from at least our editorial perspective, like we simply don't have the capacity to target each individual sub-community, but we do focus a lot on the more kind of ontological aspects of the whole thing, such that they can be applied by anybody who needs them.
Certainly in an article, it's not a bad idea to try to address the way it's impacting individual audiences or communities, whether that's ethnic or age. It's a good point.
Thank you.
Hi, Christian von Preissing, Knight Science Journalism Fellow. I like to mention something that I learned about recently. Well, it's a concept that's been coined online. It's called the Brandolini's Law, which is just Brandolini's Law, which is just if somebody makes a claim, it takes them 5-10 seconds to come up with a claim, and it takes you about 6 hours to come up with a rebuttal. So it's always going to be a losing battle in terms of trying to debunk. And to my question, I'm wondering, I don't want to spend 6 hours researching and figuring out how to debunk something that just came off the top of somebody's head. So I want to match the outrage with outrage, and to say that these people who are sharing this content and benefiting from all the engagement, they are trying to sell you on something. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, how effective is it to match, to counter by saying these people are trying to make money off of you, these people are trying to get a lot of engagement off of you?
I only know it from my perspective and working as a journalist and from my book. But I will say this idea of telling people like these people are trying to make a profit is part of it, but it's only one part of a multifactorial approach, because they can counter that with saying the medical industry is also trying to make a buck. Like, I mean, they can do that same thing. So that doesn't really work. And it is very, very hard in a very conversational way to explain why the idea they believe in is perhaps not evidence-based. But I don't think that that necessarily works. And I don't know that outrage works as well as much, because at the end of the day, these are people who do usually really believe something. And so that's what I mean by working kind of with empathy of they don't want to feel like an idiot. And when you come with anger or like stupendous, like, oh, they're just kind of offended because then they feel stupid. It's a very, very delicate balance. I think Jen could probably speak to this more than I can working daily with that, but that's what I found from my reporting. And also just actually being curious. I think so many journalists aren't actually curious as to why people believe these things, what appealed to them. They don't ask those questions like, can you take me through like what exactly, who told you about it? What? Actually being curious, why do you believe in this? I think so many journalists are so quick to be like, these people aren't educated or these people believe anything. It's not true, because I'm sure at some point all of us have believed in something that was later debunked. But Jen could probably speak from
Yeah, I think you that was a really great, I think, summary of coming where people are. During COVID, I was getting like death threats and stuff because the videos that I made were about COVID and masks and stuff, and well, that's just what happened during that time. But I certainly have learned a lot of important lessons in trying to debunk myths. I do agree with Rina. You know, I'm quite, you see me up here, right? You can imagine me in a video talking about some COVID myths, and I get kind of wired and up in arms. And sometimes I think what it just did was anger people, kind of like what you were talking about. I've had to learn how to change my approach a little bit. I'm still not always successful. I just shot a video this morning on okra water that will go up on YouTube soon in the next couple of days. I just did this for the Tamarind Hall show that aired on Tuesday. So people are drinking okra steeped in water 24 hours, and then they drink the slime stuff like the next day. And the things that people are saying about it is that it serves as a cleanser detox. They're actually saying in some cases it helps increase vaginal secretions, that it may help with labor and different things like that. What I've learned is, number one, it's very important for me to know where things come from. This okra water is something that's drank in a number of parts of the world, first of all, so it's a cultural practice, and I think it's helpful to know when things are. Sometimes I have not known when practices were cultural, and that got me in trouble, or I feel sometimes even remiss now, like, oh, I wish I had known, because my family, as far as I know, as far back as I know, is from here. I'm not Caribbean, I'm not African, I'm not Asian, et cetera. So that is one thing that has been helpful if I know that. The other thing is speaking with sensitivity and with compassion, right? So like with okra water, for example, I say, well, look, it's not a cleanser detox, that your body does it for itself, and it's not, we don't have data that shows it's going to increase your vaginal secretions. But a couple things it does have. What can I say good about it? At least it's just okra and water, right? It's got soluble fiber. I'm not mad at it. And then the end for me is sometimes offering people the option. So I've changed my stance from being like, I never used to say things like, this is crap and you should never, I never was like that. But now sometimes I'm like, look, it's not something that we have the evidence that says it does this, However, if it's something that you would like to still try, make sure you talk with your doctor. I've tried to find ways to meet people where they are. I don't know if this is helpful for you as a journalist, but I have learned and still continue to learn, I think, the hard way about, reaching people. My outrage doesn't necessarily help the situation, I have learned, so.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing is I think examples work really, really well. I know when I spent a lot of time trying to, there's a lot of hysteria around clean beauty and like, if you use this moisturizer, all these chemicals are going into your body. And I would tell people, do you ever go to a pool? I go all the time in the summer. Are you terrified when you jump in the pool? Because it seems like you believe that there's no barrier between the skin. So all those chemicals are going into your body, right? And they're like, oh, I never thought of it like that. Like, actually, the skin is a pretty tough barrier. I think once in a while you can put on sunscreen and nothing's gonna happen to you. Just giving people examples where they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. And this is what I mean by being conversational instead of academic. If you give people examples of that, or like my favorite example is like the EWG's Dirty Dozen, where they're terrified of pesticide residue. You say, oh, well, did you read it, the study? Because you'd have to eat 8,000 nectarines in one day at the highest level and you'd still be okay. Do you think you're gonna eat 8,000 nectarines? Oh, I didn't think of it like that. Stuff like that kind of helps them a little bit. And saying it in a nice way, not in a sort of like, way.
I think it's also important to in our coverage, acknowledge the reasons people are turning to these things, right? So I just did a piece for Prevention magazine on the prescription drugs that people are now taking for wellness, which kind of makes me crazy, right? But people are getting online, they're getting rapamycin and metformin and all these medications that they're taking for wellness, not for any of the reasons why they were approved. And in the piece, we go into a lot of detail about why women are so stressed and so open to these kinds of things, feel that they're not heard in the medical profession. I think that's important because a woman reading that kind of piece is going to be saying the things that we acknowledge in the piece, that I'm looking for this because I don't get what I need from my doctor. So I think that's important as well.
Hi, my name's Josh. I cover health for a local news outlet in San Antonio. I've recently started covering wellness stories, including about peptides in San Antonio and ibogaine, a veteran who actually went to Mexico to take ibogaine. And a lot of the people in the research world and the doctors I've interviewed have been very appreciative of my coverage. But one thing I've been concerned about is that I don't really have good data to back this up, but it seems like my work is not really reaching the folks in the middle who maybe are undecided. I kind of have concluded that I'm probably not going to reach the people who are spending hours a day listening to wellness podcasts, and I understand that. But I sometimes worry that my work is kind of existing in its own echo chamber, where it's only reaching the people who kind of already agree with who are trying to debunk the work, the skeptic community, but not really the folks who maybe are undecided and maybe it could have some impact there, if that makes sense. So I was kind of wondering if y'all had any more thoughts, you've talked about this a little bit, but any more thoughts on being a little bit more proactive and bringing the work to those folks in the middle and getting it in front of them.
How do you know it's not reaching them?
I don't. I'm basically just going off of, our metrics, which aren't that great, and vibe. I don't really know that it's not reaching them, but I guess that's been a concern, is that it isn't reaching them. I don't know for sure that it isn't, but I'm trying to think of ways to maybe get it in front of more of those types of people.
Okay, that's the last question, by the way, so.
I'll just say one thing. You could be right. It's not hitting the people that you want, but that's because we're also dealing with a repetition game. If people are seeing 1,000, so many posts on social media and from all of their podcasters saying this wellness thing is so great, well, that's what they're going to believe. But when you start seeing more and more articles and more people over time pushing back, that helps. So you are helping in the tide of it. It's not necessarily that your story is going to change them, but maybe one day they're like, does this thing really work? I'm going to do a Google News search. And then all these articles come up, so you're a part of it. So I think that does matter, but I understand that frustration of feeling like this isn't hitting the exact person I want, but it might be, just perhaps later on. Tides shift. After a while, like I said, it's like the diet industry. People after a while are like, this isn't working, or I'm hearing a lot of negative feedback about it, and it starts to turn, but it takes a while.
I would say also people really like reading about themselves, and I personally enjoy reading pieces. I mean, this is not reading about myself, but I do enjoy wellness stories that incorporate people who were on the fence about something or who thought that they would never fall prey to something dumb. And I don't know necessarily if you have or haven't been interviewing these people in your work, but those are the sorts of people who you want to be reading your work. I think the more that you can incorporate them into the reporting process, the better luck you might have.
And I just wanted to throw it out there. I don't, again, not a journalist, but throw it up on TikTok. Or even just if that's not your thing to talk about it, someone else can, or even just frames, graphic frames, right? Because remember these buzzwords, even if, CMOS, dysautonomia as hashtags, they reach people. And so it could be a way to continue to reach people. And I agree with Rina, I wouldn't assume that you're not reaching people, but it could be a way to guide people to the article to continue getting that message out in other ways.
And I think for all of us, it can be frustrating, right? I mean, one influencer talking about something out there is going to reach way more people and have a lot more influence than the article that we're writing debunking some of those things. But I just feel like it's just one foot in front of the other. You can't necessarily stop the tide of stuff that's people are making money off of, because as long as people are making money off of this, there's going to be that kind of emphasis. But, I feel like we're just doing our part. If I can just reach some people who are not going to take a prescription drug that's not good for them, then that's a good thing. So I think you have to see your work that way as well. Like, even if you feel like you're maybe not changing as many minds as you would like, you're still doing good work, putting the facts out there. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to my panel. They were great. I really appreciate the interest in wellness, and have a good next thing.